It may come as a shock to you that many colleges and universities are not only limiting free speech by choosing who can speak on campus, but even what students should and should not say.
It's time for your daily freedom seed. Today in 2021, the average person is 4.4 times richer than your average Joe in 1950. That's insane.
It's really cold outside.
It's climate change.
Gas is getting so expensive to fill up my car right now.
Climate change.
God, my feet hurt so bad.
It's climate change. If Trump wins 2020, I am literally going to move to Denmark.
I just really feel like there's not enough bike lanes in LA.
Honestly, AOC is our new Beyonce.
But to suggest that all Trump supporters are somehow members of some fanatic religious experience by supporting our former president of the United States is beyond the pale.
Would you rather have a conservative female president or a liberal male president?
Okay, to be completely honest, I would rather have a liberal male. Like, having a conservative in the White House, to me, it's scary.
If you're a conservative woman, I really don't feel like you're on the right side because they're pretty much against you.
So apparently conservatives are really scary. Am I scary? I didn't think I was scary.
Isabel Brown is a political commentator, spokesperson for Turning Point USA, and author of the new book, Frontlines, Finding My Voice on American College Campus. You can buy it on isabel-brown.com and also find her on Instagram at @theisabelbrown, where she posts her content as well as pictures of her corgi. Isabel, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Doing great. Love the mention of my corgi. She's the best part of every day for me, and I'm so glad to be joining you today.
Great. Yeah, it's freedom, guns, and corgis I get a lot from, and of course your content. And speaking of your content, something I noticed that you started recently, I think, was the Freedom Seed series, which is a series of short, like, informational political videos. And I wanted to jump right into some of those. Hate speech is one of the first topics I noticed, and that's something I'm very adamant about. I love free speech. I wish we had it here where I was. And so I want to play this first video of yours and get you to expand on what exactly it is that you meant. Do we have that, Justin?
Here's your daily freedom seed. Last month, I told you nearly half of Americans believe hate speech should be illegal. Good news for you. True hate speech is. We already have legal protections for true hate speech under law in the United States. American law limits our freedom of speech in 9 different categories: obscenity, fighting words, defamation, including libel and slander, which is when your words end up causing harm to someone else's reputation or livelihood, child pornography, perjury or lying under oath, blackmail, incitement to imminent lawless action, true threats, and solicitations to commit crimes. When someone commits one of those 9 actions, they are breaking the law and ultimately are eligible to be prosecuted and convicted of a crime. Hate speech under law is a protected form of speech, and we shouldn't classify any offensive language as criminal when my definition of offensive is probably dramatically different from yours.
Now, Isabel, I think that should probably be shown in schools. I know far leftists would say that's evil propaganda to share that knowledge with people. But why do you think that there's this sort of a movement going on from young people where they think they should be able to be sheltered from mean words or criticisms that they don't like?
Ultimately, I think a lot of this boils down to the fact that in America, we are culturally being taught that we should always avoid talking about any subject that has a basis in values, especially if you think you're going to disagree with someone on those topics. So even around the dinner table with your immediate family, you are adamantly discouraged by our society to talk about both politics and religion and any other value system whatsoever. Essentially, that means that young people are showing up to their college campuses and they're being taught that free speech is a scary thing, that people disagreeing with you is going to cause you emotional harm at the very least, and therefore should be banned. Things like, I love Donald Trump as president of the United States, or we need strong border security, are now being categorized as some sort of hateful language that's ultimately causing emotional harm to other people. That's what people my age like to call hate speech in the United States. But the reality is my definition of what's offensive is so much dramatically different from many of my peers, and it always depends on who's in charge and who is in power in politics and government to change that definition over and over and over again. Instead of limiting speech from other people that we disagree with, we should instead learn how to talk to each other about these things that we disagree with And I think many people unfortunately don't know that restrictions on speech do already exist in the United States. There is a limit on what you can and cannot say, and that's never talked about on college campuses or in culture in our country.
No, for sure. I agree with everything you said there. And is there a way that you can see, other than you're doing your part, you're making these videos, I think they're good. Is there a way we can steer people away from this, don't talk about religion or politics, you're gonna come off as bad? Is there a way to steer people away from that notion?
I think it really just starts with us being willing to take the first step in doing just that, and having these very crucial conversations with our friends, our family members, our peers that we know disagree with us, our professors in class, and anyone else you can think of in your life. In my own experiences, I've had so many productive conversations with people that I knew disagreed with me, but we took the time to be patient and respectful and kind and ask all the right questions of why I was coming from my perspective, why they were coming from theirs, and what we had in common at the end of the day. The truth is, most of us agree on where we want to go as a country and even as a free world. We just disagree on how to get there. So if we can get over this cultural division that our political and cultural leaders are saying is so categorized in the United States, especially on college campuses and in entertainment, that's how we can discover that we can come together on most things.
Now, did you see all the stuff around Piers Morgan and the Meghan Markle stuff? Are you privy to that knowledge?
I sure did, yes.
Now, why do you think that identity is brought up? Because I watched it the other day, and Sharon Osbourne's defending him, saying he's not racist. Now all of a sudden she's racist, she has to apologize. Why is identity always used here? Is it a deflection from having to answer the actual questions and discover the actual truth? And that's just one example, but
yeah, sadly in 2021, everything makes you racist in one way or another. So everyone is learning that they have to apologize for things that they said, that they thought, that they didn't say, because as the left says in America, silence is violence, but speech is also violence. So
Exactly.
Be prepared to be apologizing for a lot of things in our woke culture today. I think this concept of identity really centers around the fact that the left loves to identify people as a group, not as an individual. And this pertains to a lot of their policies that they put into effect here in America and around the world as well. They're not interested in your individualism. And that's why free speech isn't important, why the American dream is considered dead from the political left today, why they're making it harder to get a job or start a business, but easier to be dependent on the government, because it's much easier to identify you as a Black American or a female American or some sort of minority group, or even just as a whole individuals who no longer are an individual, but instead are a group of people subservient to the role of the government from the federal level down. That group identity is largely highlighted in race above all else. And a lot of that has to do with our culture, highlighting groups like the Black Lives Matter Incorporated movement and even Antifa spewing some of that information as well. But yeah, today the big buzzword is racism, and truthfully, everything has been labeled as racist, from Dr. Seuss books to Piers Morgan's comments on Meghan Markle on international television.
You're just so wise beyond your years, Isabel. I'm pretty sure you're actually 75 years old. Stay tuned.
I would agree with that, actually.
Stay tuned for your birth certificate to be revealed on this show. Gun rights is something else you talk about a lot, especially in these freedom seeds. I liked that one as well. And if you're not aware, we have no real gun rights in Canada. They're being taken away by name all the time. They have a big list of banned guns that they add to all the time because they can't ban them from a functionality standpoint, because that wouldn't make any sense. So you come at it from another angle, though, that I don't think I see anybody talking about it in Canada. So let's show that clip, Justin, and I want to get your explanation for that one as well.
Freedom Seed. Gun rights are women's rights. It's a biological fact that men and women are built differently. Don't at me, leftists. It's the truth. On average, biological men have a greater height and muscle mass than women. So what happens when a large man tries to attack me, a 5'1" woman? I'm tough, but I don't have a lot of options. Firearms can act as an important equalizer to give good women attacked by bad men the chance to defend themselves. It's no surprise then that women are the fastest growing demographic of gun owners. In fact, specifically women between the ages of 18 and 34 are the most likely to become gun owners. So what's the deal with women buying so many guns? Simple, for protection. A 2017 Pew Research study found that nearly 70% of female gun owners cite personal protection as their primary reason for owning a gun.
A lot of hate speech in there as well, I gotta say. So to play devil's advocate on that, what would you say is a stat or evidence showing that more women should be carrying for their own protection?
Yeah, unfortunately, the data just isn't really out there when it comes to proving carrying every day can protect you. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that many of the instances where women do prove to defend themselves and protect themselves in situations of attack don't get reported when a firearm is being used. So I would direct people who are listening to this program, maybe to the FBI. They have some great statistics on gun use and stories of gun use being used in defensive situations to save someone's life. But the data is out there when it comes to the individual being a woman protecting themselves against a man. You know, I think it's sad today that gender is being so dramatically erased, not just in the US, but around the world. And at first, it was masculinity being attacked, that was toxic and not supposed to be present in society. And today in 2021, it's femininity and women that are being attacked by our society and our culture. Instead, we're all just supposed to be non-binary, live outside of this male or female option, and somehow lie in the middle. You see women being spelled WOMXN today in America because there are women who are not women, apparently, which is very confusing. And the mental gymnastics associated with that is enough to tire out anybody, even if you do work in politics and have to deal with this stuff every day. But yeah, 70% of new gun owners who are women in America cite personal protection as their primary reason for wanting to purchase a firearm. That's a statistic that people should be paying attention to. Feminists, women's rights advocates, leftist groups, and conservative groups alike. This is not a political issue. This is a human rights issue. And it makes me sick to my stomach every time I read another story of a young woman who went out for a job or who lives alone in her apartment and is taken advantage of because of the known factual biological differences between men and women. I have a concealed carry permit here in the United States, and I do carry a personal firearm for protection. That's a decision that I made on my own, but I can tell you there are dozens of people in my own life, conservative and liberal alike, who have made the same decision. And I think when we can remove this political stigma associated with the Second Amendment, we know that this is a human rights problem, not just a political one. And the Second Amendment was created to allow for protection for all Americans, regardless of who you vote for.
I think that's really cool, Isabel. And obviously, I think that the most obvious reason that you mentioned as a great equalizer would be sexual assault. Now, you're on college campuses. You're out there with your male counterpart. I'll call him Will Witt. You guys can just change genders now, I think. But when you're on college, when you're on college campuses and you're explaining this to maybe girls, maybe boys as well, is there a common answer as to why they shouldn't get a gun? Because I think ingrained in them a lot of the times, especially in California, where I think you guys are both from, it's very anti-gun, and then even we've seen with incidents there in the no-gun zones, of course, there's the shooter there. Is there a common answer or excuse that is given as to why we should still not allow guns to be purchased? We still need more restrictions. Is there something that you hear often?
I'm actually from Colorado, which is another state that has a complete assault on the Second Amendment and is really doing everything they can to prevent gun ownership as much as possible. But I've done a lot of work in California, and arguably they have some of the strictest gun control in the country when it comes to your ability to own the firearm of your choosing, to have extended magazines that have more than 10 bullets in them, and obviously to exercise your right to carry, which is the natural progression of what happens after you buy a firearm. You want to have it with you all the time for personal protection. It's a dangerous situation when we're seeing this limitation of the ability of people to take care of themselves and defend themselves, especially on college campuses. And there's a very, very small number of states in America that allow for something called campus carry, meaning you can conceal carry a firearm on your college campus, public or private. Obviously, some of those schools have different rules, but I was very fortunate in Colorado to have access to campus carry, and that was always one of my primary concerns was sexual assault. You see on college campuses in America, and I'm not sure if the same is true where you are from or in Europe or around the world, but we have little stations that have a blue call light. So it's like a little blue light, and you call the police on this phone pole, essentially, and then you wait at one of these stations if you find yourself in danger on campus. What I love to tell people is the reality is if you call the police from one of these stations, it's going to take several minutes if not up to 10 or 15 minutes for the police to get there and diffuse whatever situation you feel uncomfortable in. When you have the ownership and the training and the proper responsibility under your belt to defend yourself, it takes 2 seconds instead of a few minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And you just have so much more control over the situation, and you're empowered to deal with whatever you're dealing with in that moment rather than being completely reliant on someone else. I think the reasons for limiting gun ownership through gun control from the left all center around emotional arguments. There's not a lot of logic there, but they point towards school shootings. They point toward situations of negligent discharges from guns where people accidentally fired their gun when they weren't meaning to. And that is so unbelievably rare when you think about the gun ownership rate in the United States and how many people have access to a firearm all the time. The reality is, if you have the right training, you're constantly practicing, and you're taking ownership of your empowerment through owning a firearm, you are going to be so much better prepared to handle any emergency that you are a part of, or that your family, friends, and community might be a part of as well. So we try to break down the logical arguments there and avoid some of these emotional conversations, which are tragic and harrowing, but even those things could have prevented themselves had there been a good guy with a gun who was well trained and equipped to handle those situations.
Yeah, and I think the knowledge of firearms is incredibly low amongst those who are against it. I mean, I wish I'd queued up the video here, but there's a clip of mine from when I first started doing streeters for Rebel News where I was asking people about an assault rifle ban and what was an assault rifle. None of them knew. One guy who really thought he knew thought that the measurement was an assault rifle can shoot 3 to 4 blocks. I'd never heard that measurement for bullet distance before. But the gun ban is gun specifically for assault weapons. Do you know what an assault rifle is?
Yeah, assault rifle would be sort of like a hunting rifle, long, and it'd be long range, like probably 4 blocks.
But that's the level of knowledge on guns from the anti-gun crowd. I think most people would understand that it's for self-protection and we don't want to go too far. But then again, we don't have a constitution here that says we have the right, whereas I wish we did. Some other video that I liked of yours was the Women's March of last year, and I have a lot of questions about how it would compare to 2021. Obviously, it didn't really happen this year, which is what we'll get to. So let's play that Women's March video from last year.
I believe that women could do whatever they want, and they are not like less than men, and
Like, it really is a man's world, and I feel like we should change that.
It's like, as a man, what rights do I have that you don't have?
Inherently, men are still getting paid more.
Have you ever thought that maybe women choose jobs that pay less than men, so then the wage gap reflects that they choose jobs that pay less? You know, men mostly dominate like engineering and stuff like that pays more.
Now math and science is dominated with women, but men are still getting the jobs because they're men.
Your dog is very, very sweet. Dogs for women's rights.
2020 marks the year that there is less access to abortion clinics in America since 1978.
Hateful, horrible things to continue. It's not just Trump, it's all the people that support him.
This president is the worst of any human being.
Now, Isabel, why no big march this year? Is it because there's no Trump? We saw Black Lives Matter and all these other marches going on all summer long. Why nothing this year? Or was there one that I missed?
I don't think there's one that you missed. Ultimately, I think most of this centers around all of the restrictions in these big cities that are run by Democrats when it comes to COVID-19 regulations. Big gatherings like this just aren't happening in 2021. The March for Life was largely online as well. So I think we're going to be seeing sort of a diminishment of these big marches and gatherings and protests throughout the next few months at the very least. But my hope is that they do come back, because it is very enlightening to speak to some of these people about why they're attending these marches, why they genuinely believe women have less rights than men in America and around the world. Obviously, there's zero evidence to back up their claims, and they're sort of just regurgitating talking points that they've heard from politicians or cultural figures. But it's important to have these conversations because you have to understand where the left is coming from in order to properly negate their arguments.
So who do you think they would blame this time around? It's 2021. Joe Biden's the president. He won by 600 trillion votes, Isabel. What is the thesis around any of these protests going to be? Because they've, for the large part, not been about what they say they about. March for Your Lives is march against Trump, women's marches march against Trump with different hats on. Where are we going to place this blame? Is there a new talking point that I'm not familiar with?
Incredibly, all of these marches and organizations are still anti-Trump, and he seems to be living rent-free in the minds of leftists, even as he's playing golf down in Florida at Mar-a-Lago. So I think at least for the next few months, they can probably get away with continuing to blame everything on our former president. But you're absolutely right. At some point, that's not a valid excuse anymore, and there needs to be an honest conversation about what they're upset about and who is responsible for those actions.
Now, overall, I wanted to get to where you think a lot of these thoughts and beliefs come from, but I do want to package it up with this next clip of yours, sort of along the same lines of the whole gender argument here from the Women's March. And it's another great one from you guys, which is who should pay for a date? I really enjoyed this one. Can we play that one, please?
I definitely hold doors, like chivalry's not all the way dead.
Do you think that the idea of traditional gender roles is still important in relationships?
On occasion, but no, I think we're getting further and further away from that in today's society.
It's more of a social thing and less of a gender thing because gender roles change per culture.
I think the roles have definitely changed a little bit, but I think it's definitely important, like to keep the main ones in place, such as the man opening the door for the girl.
Would you ever propose to the man?
I don't think so.
I wouldn't care if a woman proposed, but I like I said, I would probably propose.
Would you ever propose to a man?
No. No.
Good.
Just because I feel like that's just a guy's role, you know?
I 100% agree.
I think marriage is outdated. I think that was something used back then to connect families and, you know, have peace among families. I don't really believe in marriage anymore. I just believe love the person that you're with.
Marriage is about connecting families, Isabel. He's really taking the 13th century approach to that. You send your princess across Europe to another family, they get married, they consummate it there. Where do you think that a lot of this thinking is ingrained from? Because really it's only popped up over the last 20 years, I want to say.
Most of this completely centers around something I spoke about earlier on this podcast, and that's eliminating the idea of individuality and assigning everybody to a group. And we'll talk about the most extreme level of that right now, but I think these are all stepping stones to get to this end goal from the most progressive left in America. Black Lives Matter, Inc. recently released a statement when they first popped up their new website last summer in 2020 that one of their primary goals as an organization was to completely get rid of the nuclear family in the United States and around the world. In their view, the nuclear family is this oppressive, patriarchal, capitalist engine in order to keep controlling people rather than all living harmoniously and doing whatever you want and, identifying yourself as a group and a community, living in a commune rather than a family. So their goal was actually to completely get rid of the idea of mothers and fathers and instead have surrogate parents and the entire community raises a child with zero gender identity. They can choose for themselves and the whole 9 yards of nonsense there. That is the end goal of the progressive left in America. So when it comes to degrading gender identity and gender roles, the things that we're seeing today, getting rid of masculinity and femininity. California, for example, is getting rid of boys and girls sections in department stores or toy stores. No longer can you spell women with an E or men with an E. We're getting to this point where we're not identified by our unique characteristics as individuals, myself being a biological woman and having the capacity to create life being one of the most important aspects of my identity. But instead, we're all just people. It's kept generic on purpose because they want to keep the human population as generic as possible in order to be subservient to one overarching power, that being the government. So ultimately, I think this assault on marriage is really connected to getting rid of the nuclear family and ultimately getting rid of your unique individual or familial identity to begin with.
Now, Isabel, on more of a personal level, you're out there, you're with the most masculine guy ever, Will Witt. Shout out to Will Witt. You're interviewing these people in California, and maybe there's a bit of it in Colorado, like you mentioned. But having been in these conservative circles, and you probably are friends with a lot of let's call it traditional gender roles, even though I think that would just be normal. Are you seeing a lot of this from men you interact with, from girls you interact with? Because I watched something from California, something I had written down was Logan Paul versus Caitlyn Bennett. And all the guys on this show, it's pretty obvious they're from California and grew up there. They're offended by any little nugget of truth that she says that isn't completely progressive, they're shocked to hear even the notion of anything. I'm afraid to say these things on YouTube because I'll get taken down. Do you notice it in your day-to-day life and your interactions with people?
I don't see it as much now that I've graduated from my undergraduate and graduate school programs on my college campuses. I see it obviously when I travel to speak to student groups at their universities, but a lot of this follows political lines and the different political ideologies in America. The left overwhelmingly is leaning into this woke culture as much as humanly possible, afraid to offend anybody, and that's where you're seeing all of these problems of pronouns, signs outside of bathrooms, and things like the Equality Act going through our United States Congress that passed completely along party lines in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, whereas conservatives, amazingly, are becoming countercultural in an unexpected way by embracing traditional gender roles, getting married very young and having lots and lots of children, and overwhelmingly returning to the church in America, which is a very interesting phenomenon I don't think we could have predicted even just a few years ago. If you engage in the most progressive aspects of culture, social media, large corporations, college campuses, that's where you're seeing a lot of this insane culture start to generate and then spread throughout the United States of America. So it's definitely out there, but doing what I do as an outspoken conservative and mostly engaging with people who I agree with every day, I don't see a lot of it in my own social circles.
Well, I'm glad that you managed to escape. I work in Toronto, here in Canada. It's impossible to escape it just walking around. Guy on his bike, riding a bike, wearing a mask, you know, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your book. It's called Frontlines, Finding My Voice on an American College Campus paperback. I'll say it properly for you guys. Frontlines, Finding My Voice on an American College Campus. It's available on your website and I believe on Amazon and Barnes & Noble as well. What inspired the books? What inspired the book, particularly in the sense that I'm curious to know what really opened your eyes, or have you always been conservative?
I have always been conservative, but politics was never something that I wanted to engage in professionally. It was always just a personal hobby for me when I was a younger child and in high school. I actually went to college to become a doctor. My dream was to be a trauma surgeon, and I studied biomedical sciences at the large research university in my home state of Colorado, at Colorado State University, which is pretty notorious in my home state for being the big cowboy agricultural public school, a very conservative environment, and somewhere I expected to really find a community of people that shared my foundational values. Obviously, I wrote the whole book on how the opposite of that happened, and I found myself in this extreme, intolerant leftist environment that was hell-bent on indoctrinating students towards leftism rather than educating young adults to become progressive and effective members of society, progressive in the true sense, not the leftist political version that we see today. So even in my classes like anatomy and physics and organic chemistry, I was being taught that, yes, there's two sets of chromosomes, but gender is actually a social construct. So forget everything we said. And we would refer to a baby in the womb as a baby through the whole process of learning about fetal development, when a heartbeat is formed, when unique fingerprints are formed, only to be told at the end of the unit that that actually was a fetus and termination of a pregnancy had nothing to do with ending a unique biological life. We spent a lot of time, even in those classes, talking about why free speech is no longer applicable to American culture, or why we don't need a wall at the southern border, and especially how evil the orange guy was sitting in our Oval Office. And it was so shocking to me as someone who chose science because I love the pursuit of objective truth, that science in academia today is not driven by that pursuit of truth. It's driven by the changing narrative of our political correctness culture that we see every single day in the United States of America. I became a very outspoken conservative as a result of the extreme leftist environment on my campus because I looked around and I didn't see anybody advocating for the values that I held closest to my heart. So I thought, I'll just have to do it. And I instantly became labeled as that conservative girl or that Turning Point USA girl on campus. Got death threats, threats of violence. My address to my one-bedroom apartment was doxed online without my consent. So all of a sudden, nowhere in my college community was safe. Not my classroom, not the student government office where I was referred to as Nazi Barbie or white power Barbie, and not even my apartment right off campus. So it was so eye-opening to see how far the left would go to silence not just conservative ideas, but even objective truth in the name of indoctrinating people toward leftism. I wrote this book because it became so apparent to me that we're hearing a lot about how crazy college campuses are when someone like Dennis Prager or Charlie Kirk comes to speak on a campus and there's a big protest. But nobody knew that myself, as a campus student activist without a big following on social media, would be threatened with a failing grade in a class 6 months later because I had invited them, or people trying to kick me out of student government because I had voted for President Donald Trump. And this assault on conservative students is happening every single day. They're just not stories that make it to the national conversation, but they are stories that are worth being told. And I hope to inspire a lot more of that storytelling through revealing what happened in my own college experience and also covering the state of affairs on our campuses today through my book, Frontlines.
It's not easy to write a book, and it takes a lot of courage to and building up your inner self to come out and be the person who's willing to speak, especially against all the stuff that you've come up against, which of course is horrible. We're going to end the YouTube segment there, Isabel. So if you guys want to see the rest of the interview, go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's just $8 a month. Or if you sign up for a year, you get 2 months free, plus a free trial. So we're going to send that to Isabel right after, because I know she's going to sign up. rebelnewsplus.com. And what are we going to talk about? For you guys to go and watch it, we're going to talk about what's inside Isabel's DMs. Is she getting hate speech at her every single day? We're going to find out her message to women at the women's, I'm forgetting the thing here. What's it called? The
Young Women's Leadership Summit coming up in June.
I should really re-record that segment now. And we're going to talk about the anniversary of Stop the Spread. So all that is coming up behind the paywall. Go to rebelnews.com, you guys. Thank you for watching Andrew Says. If you want to see the full uncut version, go to rebelnewsplus.com and sign up today so you can see the entire episode where we talk about topics we can't show you on YouTube. They'll ban us.